Imagine a father in a grocery store just, looking at his phone, completely ignoring his daughter's quiet request for ice cream.
Right, classic scenario.
Yeah, exactly. So she asks a little louder, and he still ignores her. So she elevates it. She starts whining. Nothing. Finally, she drops to the floor and just screams at the absolute top of her lungs.
And let me guess, he immediately hands her the ice cream.
Immediately, he just gives it to her. Now, to the untrained eye, that father just gave in to a tantrum. But if you look at the invisible contingencies at play, he didn't just give in. He actively and systematically engineered a screaming behavior.
Exactly. I mean, he took a perfectly appropriate, quiet request, placed it on extinction, and differentially reinforced successive approximations of a full-blown meltdown.
Yeah.
It's literally a masterclass in behavioral manipulation, just applied in the absolute worst possible direction.
Meaning, he completely ignored her initial polite attempts, which is the extinction part, and only provided the reward when she slightly escalated her behavior. He kept, raising the bar for his attention until she was practically screaming.
That's exactly what happened.
So welcome to today's deep dive into behavioral intelligence. We are taking a stack of clinical sources, and today's mission is dedicated to mastering BACB's 6th edition task list item G.11, which is shape dimensions of behavior.
A crucial skill.
Right. We're going to look at the exact mechanics of how behavior changes form, speed, and intensity so you don't end up accidentally building grocery store tantrums.
And, to operate in an elite clinical level, you cannot just have a vague sort of textbook understanding of this concept. You need the clinical definition locked in.
Okay, so hit us with the definition.
So shaping is the process of systematically and differentially reinforcing successive approximations toward a terminal behavior.
Successive approximations toward a terminal behavior. Got it.
Right. And today, we are exploring exactly how clinicians manipulate the specific, measurable dimensions of behavior to achieve clinical success. And we're going to cover all of them. So topography, frequency, latency, duration, and amplitude, or magnitude.
Okay, well, let's unpack this. Because to avoid accidentally building that tantrum, clinicians have to intentionally target exactly which dimension of the behavior they are changing. Right.
Yes, you have to know what you are shaping before you start delivering reinforcement, period.
So let's start with the first major category, which is shaping across topographies.
Right, so shaping across topographies occurs when the actual physical form of the behavior changes. The topography, like what the behavior physically looks like, is shifting step by step toward a terminal goal.
Okay.
Think about a speech therapist teaching a child to speak. The terminal behavior is a fully articulated phrase, but you do not start by demanding the entire phrase.
Right, because the learner doesn't have that in their repertoire yet. I mean, if you sit there waiting for a non-vocal child to say, I want the blue car, you are literally going to be waiting forever.
Exactly. You have to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
So first, the clinician might provide reinforcement simply for lip movement. Once lip movement is consistent, that specific topography is placed on extinction, and the clinician shifts the reinforcement criteria to a vocal sound.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And then when the sound is mastered, the criteria shifts to a single word and finally to a full phrase. So the physical form of the behavior is entirely different at the end than it was at the beginning.
That makes total sense. Another example from our sources involves teaching social skills. Say you have a learner who isolates themselves during recess.
Very common.
Yeah. So the terminal behavior is fully interactive, cooperative play with peers. But again, you can't just wait for that to happen.
No, you'd be waiting all day.
Right. So first, you reinforce just being in proximity to peers, like just standing 5 feet away. Then, once they do that reliably, you stop reinforcing distance and only reinforce parallel play-so, playing with their own blocks right next to a peer. And finally, you shift the requirement to fully interactive play, like actually trading the blocks.
Notice how in both of those examples, the form of the behavior completely transformed. But as an elite clinician, you must also master the second category, which is shaping within topographies.
Okay, so how was that different?
This is where the physical form of the behavior remains completely constant. But another dimension of that behavior is manipulated. You mentioned earlier we need to cover all the dimensions, so let's break them down, starting with magnitude.
Okay, so the behavior looks the exact same, but we are like tweaking the volume knobs on it, so to speak.
That's a perfect analogy. Consider a student who speaks at a whisper, maybe around, 45 decibels. The topography, the actual words they are articulating, is perfectly fine. We do not want to change the form of the behavior. We want to change the intensity.
So we just need them to be louder.
Exactly. The clinician differentially reinforces approximations to increase the volume. First, you reinforce speaking at 50 decibels. The student has to speak just a little bit louder to access the reinforcer.
Got it.
And then, once that is consistent, you push the criteria to a normal conversational level of, say, 65 decibels.
The sources mention a really interesting example of magnitude regarding a physical education teacher.
Oh, right, the life preserver example.
Yeah. They're shaping how accurately a student can throw a life preserver to a drowning victim. The throwing motion stays exactly the same. The student plants their feet and swings their arm the exact same way every time. But the teacher is slowly shrinking the required radius of the throw.
Which is a function of magnitude, the precise amount of force applied to the throw.
Right.
If the student throws it within the 10-foot radius of the target, they get praise. Then the teacher tightens the criteria to a 5-foot radius, then a 2-foot radius. The form hasn't judged, but the precision, which is driven by magnitude, has.
Okay, so that covers topography and magnitude, but earlier you listed duration, latency, and frequency. These are heavily tested, but I feel like they often trip people up because they involve time and counting rather than just what the behavior looks or sounds like.
They absolutely do trip people up.
Let's talk about duration first.
So shaping duration is incredibly common in school and clinic settings. Duration is just the total extent of time in which a behavior occurs.
Right.
Suppose you have a learner who can only remain seated and on task for 30 seconds before eloping from the table. The topography sitting at the desk working is correct, but the duration is functionally useless for a classroom environment.
So you wouldn't just jump to demanding they sit for 20 minutes. You'd set a timer for, say, 45 seconds. And if they stay seated for 45 seconds, they access reinforcement. Then you push it to 1 minute, then 2 minutes.
Spot on. You are systematically shaping the temporal extent of the behavior. Now let's look at latency. Latency is the measure of lapsed time between the onset of a stimulus and the initiation of a response.
Okay, I see this all the time with compliance or answering greetings. You say, "Hi, Sarah," and Sarah knows how to say hi back so the topography is there, but it takes her like 12 seconds to process and respond.
Yes, and in a natural social environment, a 12-second delay makes the other person feel ignored and they just walk away.
Right, which means the natural reinforcement of social interaction is entirely lost.
Exactly. So to shape latency, we want to shrink that delay. We might set our initial criteria at 10 seconds. If Sarah responds within 10 seconds of the greeting, she receives high-magnitude reinforcement.
Okay.
Once she masters that, we only reinforce responses that occur within 7 seconds, then 5 seconds, down to a natural 2-second latency. We didn't change what she said. We changed how quickly the behavior was initiated.
That makes a lot of sense. That leaves frequency. So shaping frequency means we are just looking to increase or decrease the total number of times a behavior happens in a given observation period, right?
Correct. Imagine a client who knows how to independently request a break using a communication device. The topography is mastered.
Right. They know how to push the button.
Yes. However, they only use it once per day, and they engage in aggressive behavior the rest of the time they need a break. We need to shape the frequency of that functional communication.
So we just need them to do it more often.
Exactly. We might start by reinforcing the learner only if they request a break twice in a session. Then 3 times. We are shaping the count.
Now, in the sources, B.F. Skinner's book, Science and Human Behavior, brings up a fascinating analogy about shaping that I want to test out with you.
Oh, the clay analogy.
Yes. He compares shaping behavior to a sculptor working with a lump of clay.
It is arguably the most accurate metaphor in behavior analysis. I mean, think about what a sculptor actually does with that clay. You do not build a statue by magically conjuring it out of thin air.
Right.
And you don't build it by gluing pre-made pieces together either.
You start with an undifferentiated mass, you squeeze it, you keep some parts, you remove others, and you slowly mold it.
Yes, and the parts you remove represent the old approximations that you are no longer reinforcing. You let those fall away.
Wow, yeah.
You take what the learner is currently doing, reinforce the slight variations that resemble your goal, and you continuously mold it. But, and this is a big but, because this process relies on continuous fluid changes, the margin for clinical error is massive.
Oh, I bet.
If the clinician loses focus on the clay, the behavior breaks down entirely.
Which brings up the traps, the common mistakes that catch practitioners off guard. If I'm the sculptor and I look away from my clay for even a second, what actually happens?
That is trap number 1, poor monitoring. Progress in shaping is almost never a perfectly linear upward trajectory. It is erratic. If a clinician's attention wanders, they might miss a subtle, microscopic approximation. Let's say you are shaping a vocal approximation, and the learner finally makes a buh sound instead of just a grunt, but you were looking at your data sheet.
You missed it, so you didn't reinforce it.
And by not reinforcing it, you have effectively placed the exact step you needed on extinction. The behavior stalls. The learner gets frustrated because their increased effort didn't pay off, and the behavior regresses. You must be hyper-vigilant.
Okay, so poor monitoring means the behavior stalls out because you missed the cue. But what happens if you are watching closely, but you just keep rewarding that same beginner step for a month straight?
Like they get stuck.
Yeah, like the kid masters the buh sound, but you just keep cheering for buh and never push for ball.
That is trap number 2, pacing errors. This is where the science heavily relies on the art of behavior analysis. Well, if you reinforce a specific approximation for too long, you entrench that behavior. It becomes so heavily reinforced that the learner has absolutely no motivation to move to the next step.
I see.
I mean, why would they try the harder response of saying ball when saying buh gets them the toy every single time?
But I imagine the inverse is just as dangerous, right? If you push them to say the full word ball too quickly before buh is even fluent, they just fail.
Precisely. Raising the criteria too fast causes the behavior to break down entirely. If the jump from approximation A to approximation B is too wide, the learner cannot contact the reinforcement.
They just hit a wall.
Yeah. The behavior undergoes extinction without an achievable alternative, and the learner simply gives up. Finding that perfect pacing, knowing exactly when to push the criteria and when to hold steady, is what separates an average practitioner from a top 1% clinician.
I think this connects perfectly to a third trap, accidental shaping of harmful behavior.
This is a huge one.
Let's look back at our grocery store example from the very beginning. That father wasn't intentionally trying to teach his daughter to scream.
Of course not.
But by poorly monitoring his own reinforcement delivery and setting the criteria for his attention higher and higher, he accidentally molded that clay into a massive tantrum.
Yeah.
We inadvertently wait for problem behavior to escalate before we finally intervene.
Right, which means we're differentially reinforcing the highest magnitude of that problem behavior.
Yeah.
To truly avoid that trap, we need to transition into a clinical power insight. We have talked about the what's and the how, but we need to understand the underlying mechanics of why shaping actually works.
Okay, let's hear it.
Shaping relies entirely on the dual effect of differential reinforcement. It is not just about giving a reward for the new behavior. It is equally about what happens to the old behavior.
Right, because you have to stop reinforcing the old step to motivate them to try the new step.
Exactly. When you move from one approximation to the next, you place the previous approximation on extinction. And what happens when a previously reinforced behavior is placed on extinction?
You induce an extinction burst. But wait, normally we talk about extinction bursts as this terrible side effect we have to warn parents about. Like the behavior is going to get worse before it gets better.
Right.
You're saying in shaping, the extinction burst is actually the engine driving the process.
That is advanced clinical thinking right there. Yes.
Wow.
The defining characteristic of an extinction burst is not just an increase in intensity, it is response variability. When the old behavior stops working, the organism naturally tries new, slightly different variations of the behavior to figure out how to access the reinforcer again.
Oh, wow. So you are literally utilizing the frustration of extinction to generate the next piece of clay.
Yes. You induce the variation through extinction, you capture the specific variation that is closer to your goal, and you reinforce it. That is the molecular mechanism of shaping.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. You are harnessing the variability. But, understanding these clinical mechanics is only half the battle. It's practically useless on exam day if you can't distinguish shaping from similar sounding procedures in a tricky multiple choice scenario.
Which is why we need to transition to exam strategy and decode the Pearson VUE logic.
Bring it on.
The exam will aggressively test your ability to discriminate between shaping and other behavioral procedures that look very similar on the surface.
Let's tackle the biggest point of confusion I see. Shaping versus fading. If I'm reading a mock question and the learner's behavior is changing over time, how do I know if I'm looking at shaping or stimulus fading?
Listen to this critical exam rule. In shaping, the antecedent stimulus stays exactly the same.
Okay.
Let me repeat that. The antecedent stays the same, and the response changes over time. If a test question describes a gradual change in the antecedent stimulus like an image slowly changing from a picture of a dog to the word dog, or a physical hand-over-hand prompt being slowly reduced to a gestural prompt, That is a trick question. The answer is stimulus fading, not shaping.
That is such a clean rule. Fading equals a changing antecedent that evokes a constant response. Shaping equals a changing response in the presence of a constant antecedent.
Exactly.
What about shaping versus chaining? Both involve breaking down complex skills, and both involve a progression over time.
This is where test writers love to trap you.
Yeah.
Here is your, if you see this, choose this heuristic.
Okay, writing this down.
If you see a scenario where individual, isolated responses are linked together in a sequence, where step 1 acts as the discriminative stimulus for step 2, and step 2 for step 3, choose chaining.
Like a routine.
Right. Think about washing your hands, turning on the water, getting soap, rubbing hands, rinsing. Those are distinct, separate behaviors linked in a sequence.
Okay, but what if the exam throws a curveball? Say the question describes a kid learning to tie their shoes. They already know all the steps of shoe tying perfectly, but it takes them 5 full minutes to do it. The BCBA starts reinforcing them only if they tie their shoes in 4 minutes, then 3 minutes, then 2 minutes. Is that shaping or chaining?
That is a brilliant example of a high-level exam question.
Right.
Many students will see tying shoes and immediately select chaining because it is a multi-step task.
Right, because of the steps.
But you must look at what the clinician is actually manipulating. Are they teaching new steps in a sequence? No, the steps are already mastered.
Okay.
They're manipulating the temporal dimension, the duration of an already established sequence. It is one behavior shoe tying having its dimension tweaked over successive trials. Therefore, the answer is shaping, specifically shaping within a topography.
That distinction is going to save someone a lot of second guessing. Chaining is linking a sequence of different behaviors. Shaping is the evolution or refinement of a single behavior.
Exactly. And mastering these distinctions doesn't just ensure you pass exams, it builds elite clinicians who can see the invisible contingencies controlling behavior in the real world.
That's the ultimate.
When you deeply understand how differential reinforcement, extinction bursts, and response variability interact, you stop seeing random behavior. You start seeing the precise environmental variables that maintain it, and you gain the power to change it.
If this helped you, follow behavioral intelligence, share this episode with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you.
At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. Blast www.amethysttherapyservices.com. info at amethysttherapyservices.com.
I want to leave you with a final assignment for today. Tomorrow, observe your own natural environment. Watch how people interact in a grocery store, in your clinic, or even right in your own living room. Look closely at the subtle interactions between a parent and child, or even between coworkers. Are you inadvertently shaping a loved one's annoying habit just by waiting too long to deliver reinforcement? Notice the clay being molded all around you.